We should be involving citizens because the opinions of the citizens can give like a little bit of perspective of what is going on the ground, and by bringing them together also with politicians, we can actually create something that will be much more accepted by society.
Welcome to the European Alternatives podcast. I'm Marta Cillero Manzano, Communications Director at European Alternatives.
And I'm Irene Alonso Toucido. This podcast is built around our organization motto: democracy, equality, culture beyond the nation state. They are more than sections of a conversation. They are guiding lights for our work and reflections, ways of asking, what kind of Europe do we want to live in? Democracy is not just the ballot box, but the everyday practice of listening, deciding, belonging together. A democracy that grows wider each time another voice is heard. Equality, because without it, democracy is an empty stage. It's the promise that every person, no matter their background, stands on level ground and shares the same dignity. Culture, because it is made of the stories we tell about who we are, the songs and languages that shape our sense of home. Culture changes hearts, and with hearts, laws can follow. And finally, beyond the nation state, because our struggles do not stop at borders. Migration, climate, discrimination, these are shared human questions, and they need shared human answers. So in every episode, we journey through these four ideas. They are not abstract, they are threads we weave into a vision of Europe, more open, more just, more democratic. And today, we bring these threads into focus on one question. How do we build democratic participation that goes beyond elections? Perhaps it might be not the right question to ask, because I would say that democratic participation goes always beyond elections, and we must understand elections just as part of what is the real idea of democratic participation. This is towards a permanent People's Assembly for Europe. I'm joined today by Matteo Sisto, who represented his organization, Europiamo, at the assemblies of Florence and Vienna as part of Democratic Odyssey. His perspective will guide us through this story. Hello, Matteo. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself to our listeners?
Ciao, Irene. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a beauty to be able to have a conversation with you today. What I do? I'd like to introduce myself as a consultant for a non-profit organization. That's something that came to me quite long ago. I'm very much into the non-profit sector. I believe that we need to be working better in the non-profit sector, and by consulting, by supporting small and medium-sized organizations in Europe, we can really have an impact on the ground. I do a lot of things, as you know very well. I do strategy, I do project writing, and I facilitate participatory approaches. My organization Europiamo is sort of a small lab that I co-founded in 2020, together with a young person that was actually the mind behind all of it. His idea came to be in late 2018. He was 19 at the time. He participated to some of the European opportunities that are available to young people, like Erasmus Plus and European Solidarity Corp. And as many of us that experience those stuff, we get that sense that those are very precious opportunities for young people. But at the same time, they're not very known, they're not very used by young people. And his idea was trying to bring together the young people that participated in these activities and the organizations that are actually implementing those projects to see if we could promote that better, if we could improve the quality of those activities. And from this idea, he started to build a movement of people that I joined some few months later. I try to bring within the organization my knowledge of organizational development and a lot of other things that help the organization to grow and to become what it is now. Today it's network that brings together young people, youth organizations, and youth workers as we are about 150 individuals, 50 organizations in Italy. The main things we do is do advocacy. So we try to bring the perspective of young people and youth organizations at the institutional level. We try to do best practices. I strongly believe that our sector and non-profit sector sometimes is a little bit too competitive. What I believe into is that if we work together, if we can actually gather as a community, we can make the pie a little bit bigger for us and not fighting for the small morsels that are around. third thing we do is like European citizenship. So like we try to bring young people to participate in those experiences and to be active in their society. This is Europiamo.
Thank you, Matteo. And the reason why me and Matteo know each other is because Matteo has been part of this project called the Democratic Odyssey, which pretty much deals with the topic of the podcast today, participation and a permanent European People's Assembly. The Democratic Odyssey is a citizen assembly that started in Athens back in September 2024. And it went on moving from city to city across Europe. We actually met in Florence, where we contacted Matteo and Europiamo's organization to join the assembly, but also to join the festival that happened a day before and bring up the perspective of youngsters across Italy in this particular setup. A citizen assembly aims to put citizens at the center of decision making. To do that, it applies specific principles such as communication, equality, and it has specific methodologies to manage. A citizen assembly recruits citizens, randomly selects them by sending letters to your house. You might one day receive a letter that invites you to participate in a process in which you, together with a group of people that is very diverse and is a demographic representation of the society you're living in, will gather together to take decisions, or at least to think about specific things from the point of view of your lived experience. It's not about your expertise, it's about who you are and what kind of life you've had that gives you enough capacity, as we all have, to actually take decisions. Citizen assemblies are a way of understanding inclusion that goes to the deep core of diversity, but also citizen assemblies are a way of understanding ourselves in a world in which we are pretty much able to have choices and to make decisions just as anyone else, in a political system that sometimes it feels that it separates us from the reality we live in. Matteo, let's start this podcast with democracy. I was mentioning right at the introduction that we're going to build into these differentiated 4 blocks that European Alternatives has as a motto. And, well, democracy is pretty much at the core of what we talk about when we talk about participation and when we talk about assemblies, no? It's not about abstract institutions, but about people sitting together, listening and deciding. I was mentioning before the Democratic Odyssey, and I was also mentioning how we got to know each other. You joined both the Florence and Vienna assemblies. And I guess my first question is, from your perspective, what was at stake in these gatherings?
Let's start from why I decided to join. The first thing is that I'm a big fan of this sort of activities. I've been watching closely the field of democracy for the past 20 years since I was at school fundamentally. I felt that something wasn't going in a direction that makes sense to me. I think that these sort of activities are extremely important. They can be really an instrument to make society works again together. I think there is a lot of disconnections at different levels. One topic that I always say about is called collision. In our society nowadays, there is very few collisions among people from different social backgrounds or economic class. And those sort of moments can be really important for people to be getting a little bit the taste of what is the life of other people. I became very fascinated about the concept of citizen assemblies 6-7 years ago, something like that. I helped to organize some small activities in Italy. There are a lot of organizations that are working on this topic, and it's very, very nice to see how they progressed in the last years. It was an honor to join the Democratic Odyssey because I've been following that closely since the September Athens assembly that I could not participate. It was really cool for you guys to start in a place that was the birthplace of democracy. I'm a big fan of the Greeks, all the things that they left us in terms of democracy, but I wanted to see what could happen within like these sort of settings. So Florence to me was extremely important. Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the chance to bring the voice of young people. I think that's always like a little bit hard to be representing young people in even though I'm not a young person anymore since a lot of years, but it was a beautiful experience. I sat down with different people from different parts of Europe that had opinions. Everybody has an opinion on something. And together we discussed a lot. There was a lot of frustration because discussions and conversations among different people can lead to a lot of frustration. You see things differently. But in that space, in that particular moment, with the right approach to facilitation, you can actually bring together the people and make them work a little bit on certain things that are important for society. What was at stake? Coming back to your question, I believe that, as you can see in a lot of different countries, democratic institutions are losing trust. People are losing trust in politics. People are losing trust in themselves, in society in general. There's so much individualism. And these sort of opportunities also coming from the Conference on the Future of Europe have shown that people can regain trust in the democratic process. They learn how to converse with people that are different from them, and it helps, generally speaking, the society to understand better the concept of politics. It's compromise. It's not just bringing your voice and being right. That's not the point. As citizens, I think we have lost a little bit the idea that people can be having different ideas from us and still be right. There is not always one single truth in how society should be run and what should be done on certain things. So to me, what was at stake, what is at stake in this moment in the field of democratic participation is our society in general. In Italy, there is 50% of the people that are not going to vote. This is an abysmal number. 50% of them don't think that by going to vote, they will solve something. Or they are so disconcerted about what is happening at that level that they don't want to engage with that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I want to be, as much as possible, helping on that side. So it was an honor to see how you progressed in the different parts of the assembly, from Florence to Vienna. And now, the idea of creating a permanent People's Assembly at the European level is something that I'm really supporting. I really like that you created also a group of citizens that started to be engaged also after the end of the assembly, because this is what it is about.
A truly very powerful experience. You were mentioning several things that sort of sparked my mind here. You were particularly mentioning the fact that citizen assemblies help people understand politics. And I come from a village in Galicia. It's a region in the northern part of Spain. And there is something that I really like about this place, which is the bar culture. On a Sunday morning, I would go to a bar with my father and, we would just have a beer. But we would sit by the bar and we would just talk to every single person that sits in that bar. It's a very easy communitarian way of, just spending your Sunday morning. And previously, when you were mentioning the fact that people actually learn about politics in citizen assemblies, I think they learn about democracy. And democracy is pretty much a communitarian experience. You were mentioning how people do not trust elections or do not trust politics in general. And exactly, you see that reflection happening on the opposite way in citizen assemblies, because people arrive there and they somehow become part of a bar culture because they sit with people they don't know anything about, and they are completely different and come from different ideologies and have their own opinions. But throughout this facilitated process, they see how they can actually have so much in common with one another. Citizen assemblies are a way of reducing polarization. Citizen assemblies are a way of reducing division. And as you said, there's so much individualism that what we need is to have processes that truly empower people to see one another as exactly that, as people having a beer on a Sunday in a bar.
That's how modern democracy came to be. If I remember correctly, the coffee culture, in UK.
Yes.
that like was what brought about like democracy, like the power to the people as like should be. And we've lost that part. I mean, like we only hang out with people that are exactly like us. Like we never experience like the lives of different human beings. And that's why these sort of activities are so important, because they recreate this sort of space that allows people to connect, to see each other as human beings, and to decide something together. Politics, democracy, it's very hard. I mean, like you have your own ideas about everything. I don't know if you ever experienced like being in a group, but like it's really hard to get a decision together. Like if you're 15 people and you want to go eating somewhere, for example, think about governing a country or like a continent like the European Union. It must come from that level, like it must come from a level of understanding, a level of also. I think a part that is very clear to me is the fact that like we have an opinion of politicians that are sort of superheroes. That's they should be doing everything, they have knowledge about everything and they should have opinions very, very specific on everything. This is just impossible in this society. I mean, the pace of acceleration in our society is so fast that like nobody can know everything. And like if we expect politicians to be knowing everything, we're already not doing good thing for society. We should be involving citizens because the opinions of the citizens can give like a little bit of perspective of what is going on the ground, and by bringing them together also with politicians, we can actually create something that will be much more accepted by society. And as we were discussing before the podcast was starting, like when you don't involve the people on the ground, then like the political decisions can be nullified.
You were mentioning how difficult it is to even agree with 15 people to go to dinner. Imagine governing a country. This is also pretty much based on the idea that we have of politics, as there is this particular group of people that should be the ones that decide for us. And therefore, we have elections, we go to the ballot box, and we believe that we actually have a choice in choosing who governs us. Well, not at all. I would say that most of the people that are in power, they are in power because they come from a specific social class with a specific social background and with a specific resources for them to be in power. It's very difficult to bring diversity when you are running for power. And this is pretty much in contraposition of what happens when you practice participation. The practice of participation means that you are gonna encounter a 16-year-old woman, and this will be the first time that she ever says something in public in a table surrounded by adults. But it also means that you have a person that has migrated from a different country that doesn't even have access to citizenship, and however still has his or her voice heard. The reality of the current political system is that we are pretty much governed by straight white men. No offense here, Matteo. And there is an imperative necessity of breaking that.
I strongly agree on that. I mean, but also if you start thinking again about history, like in the past, nations were, also actually states, were governed by kings, like that got their power from divinity, like from God or from like a higher experience. And like when the change happened, like in 1800, like we started to give back the power to the people. But the issue is that like those people were still a very, very small minority. I mean, all the struggles that like, just for one example, like is the movement of the suffragettes that like helped to destroy the difference between men and women, like in terms of voting, which was incredible. Like we were having democracy, but was like partial democracy. So like we were not actually having democracy in a sense, because only a few people could speak. That's something that like always comes into my mind when you think about that. It's not easy, of course, but like most of the participatory experiments started not in the West, but they started like in other countries where like these sort of needs were much more apparent. So I think that this is the right way. The challenge in this is like, how can we give the voice to the voiceless? How can we help women in this example, like to be vocal on certain things, because they've been socialized by, like they need to be in place, they need to be kind, they need to be sort of somewhere there is an imaginary thing. We need to go back to that. Like, we need to give space, and, you know, like, especially if you're a man, like, you need to be silent sometime.
Equality and diversity in participation also deals pretty much with how we understand things. And this is something I find incredibly interesting in the concept of citizen assemblies and the implementation of the methodology, which is the fact that, first of all, there is a diversity of people that are at the table. But secondly, there can also be a diversity of knowledge and wisdoms that get represented in those spaces. In general, we see politics as, and I mean the process of decision making, as something that is pretty much intellectually based, as something that comes from the mind, as something that requires argumentation and a certain knowledge upon certain things, certain concepts, certain theories, but also certain news. I mean, you have to know what is happening in the world. However, the interesting part of citizen assemblies is that, or at least the way, for example, we've done it during the Democratic Odyssey, is that we built a space in which we are also able to incorporate other types of wisdoms that are not necessarily linked to, you know, the mind. That can be a way of expression through the body or through emotions. And this is pretty much at the core of equality and diversity as well, is pretty much at the core of understanding that having the skill of thinking in a certain way might be a privilege. And therefore you also need to deconstruct that part so that you can integrate other people in that process of decision making. There is a lot of deconstruction that happens there, no? And I'm mentioning this because it pretty much helps us bridge this next section, in which I wanted to reflect a bit on art, culture, but especially connection. Matteo, what does it spark on you when I mention these three words, art, culture, and connection?
The first thing that came into my mind is like this sentence that like I heard a couple of times, that culture hits processes of breakfast. And like it means that fundamentally that like you can have the better process in society, in like an organization, but like if you don't have the culture like around certain things, the things won't happen. So we can see that very clearly like in certain societies, like the Italian one, where young people are being put aside for a very long time. You know, like you're considered a young person in Italy up until 40, so like I should be still young for certain parts. What does it mean this? Like it means that young people are completely excluded from conversations that like are part of the daily life. I mean, like it's very hard for young people in Italy especially to be sitting in a place, like voice their opinion. We were speaking before about women, like as they were socialized in certain aspects on that. And that's, you know, like it's the same for young people. They don't have the means, the rights, or like the culture of being involved in democratic decisions. So like with my organizations, what we try to do like is, first of all, we create a safe space which young people can actually feel at ease and like bring their own opinions. You cannot imagine how many times I accepted an opinion of a young person, even though like was completely against that, just because like I wanted to see where we could go. You know, like they've never experienced that. They've never experienced somebody was supporting them, even though like it wasn't important if I believe in that or not. Like I wanted them to be feeling what it means to have agency. And you know, like I think that culture can be a really important part of our society. As we were saying before, we need symbols as humans. The rational mind has very limited capacity. I really like this analogy that we are governed by this duplicity that is like a sort of connect in the analogy of rider and elephant. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
No.
We can think about our mind in two parts fundamentally. There is a rational part that we call the rider. The rider of the elephant thinks to be in control. You know, like he's there, like sitting on the elephant, and like he knows where he wants to go, and like try to move the elephant. But at the same time, the elephant like has a huge power. Our emotions have a huge power on the kind of directions that we're going to be taking. And we need to think about that every time we think about humans, because we have this duplicity. You really want to wake up at the right time in the morning, but at the same time, you put 7 alarms because you know that something might happen. You might not be feeling in the right space to be doing that. So I think it's important also because symbols unite people, symbols created society.
This duplicity or this dualism between mind and body, or as body as the impersonation of our own emotions, to me feels very off. As in, that's a way of understanding it in society is two separate concepts. I'm not saying that you were doing that with the metaphor of the rider and the elephant, because the rider and the elephant, whether we like it or not, have a symbolic interactionism. They are somehow in relation to one another. And sometimes culture, art make me think it's this last corner of a triangle between these three parts, no? How we are somehow connected in between our minds and our bodies through the expression of both things. And culture and art is such a channel to be doing exactly that, no? It's a way of expressing that touches on empathy, on sensibility, on seeing one another farther than, through interest or competition, but rather through care and love, something that sometimes we take for granted.
Yeah, I totally agree. As I was saying before, we have a lot of things that are not working in our current society. And what I try to do in every space I am, is try to bring, I say that lightly, but I try to bring love, and young people, especially in order for them to be participating, to be more vocal, they need support, they need care, they need that sort of love that we're missing from society. There's so much hate these days. There's so much fear about one and the other that it can also be shared through culture. We're seeing a lot of different ways to approach this topic, but I believe that we need to be coming back to what unites us. And if we want our society to be better, we can do so much better than what we're doing now. And coming back also to what you're saying before, I think that culture can be also an instrument to learn. Coming back to Greece, the theater was a way to collectively understand some parts on morality, some parts of how do you feel in different contexts. And that part, we have lost it. We don't have these rituals anymore in which people gather together for learning and for sharing something and then acting on that part.
Thank you for mentioning theater, Matteo. I think theater is such an expression that can truly bring us together and sort of makes us see one another, even when we are in this very diverse society with multiplicity of things happening here and there. I wanted to go through our last block, which is Beyond the Nation State. The reason why this is part of our motto in European Alternatives is because the issues do not simply happen within, I would say, the limitations of our borders. They are farther than that, and they go beyond. We are seeing what is happening right now with the genocide in Gaza. We also see what is happening with climate change and with climate deniers and with technology, its positives and its negatives. We see how we are pretty much touched and crossed by things that happen in a completely different part of the world. And I want to mention Congo right now, for example, and the fact that we are having these mobile phones in our hands, and it's because there is people in slave conditions mining the minerals that we need for those mobile phones. The way we are interconnected with something else across the world is just massive. Sometimes it's too much. We don't even think about it. But there is a systemic structure that keeps us interrelation. Beyond the nation state, it's a motto that when it comes to democracy reminds us that well, democracy just doesn't stop at national borders. People from across Europe must come together to imagine alternatives for democracy. I want to ask you how you think people's assemblies help connect democratic struggles across countries.
I'll start by speaking a little bit about why it's important for me to work on beyond the nation state. As you were mentioning, the smart people will use the term polycrisis. That's what we are experiencing in many respects. And also coming back to what I was mentioning before, what is the nation state and how it came to be. In the past, a person was part of a nation according to where was born. Nation, like from Latin nascor, means where a person was born. State one, as I was saying before, modern state came to be 1700, was much more connected about the numbers of rules and the bureaucracy that helped to make them implement. And I believe that this is something as so the institutions that we created as a collective society as something that is not permanent, something that we should be able to change if they don't fit anymore our society. Western European countries, we put a lot of emphasis in the terms of human rights, but at the same time, there's no way for one country to impose the condition of human rights to others, because international relations are not, and international law is not so powerful. It's there is no entity that can actually help to implement those principles. So I believe that in general, democratic assemblies such as the one you are proposing can be a really good instrument to bring people together and make them realize that the conflict that there is in society can be much more channeled through discussion and not coming back to what was the past. We have completely different societies. The philosopher of some years ago used to say homo homini lupus, which means every man is a wolf to each other, which was the basis of why the nation state was created, to impose on very wild communities certain rules. We're not there anymore. We need to think beyond the nation state, because the nation state is not permanent, and we all want a society that can be better than what we have. I mean, I really feel that we are in the moments in time in which we can start to imagine something that is better than what we have. Something that will unblock the individualism, the competition that there is in our society, and go for a collaborative approach. And those experiments, in democratic participations, are just that, in a sense. It's try to see how we can create collaboration among people. And I'm very, very happy that some people that participated to other experiments, like Conference on the Future of Europe, but also the Democratic Odyssey, have become so engaged in the topic that they became ambassadors. They start to speak about these things because they felt involved. I'm also really afraid sometimes of these opportunities, because sometimes politics don't listen to this. So we need to find a way to create a follow-up that is much more institutionalized. Otherwise, we speak a lot, we engage with that, we bring a lot of heart to this conversation, but at the same time, if politicians don't listen to that or don't implement what the citizens or the people have thought about, that would be a big issue.
There are several words that I'm glad you've mentioned. One of them is institutionalization. Another one is permanency. And of course, we come from these very much fixed models of democracy. It seems like nothing can really be changed. However, we also need a sense of permanence when it comes to participation, for example, because we need to know that there is structures in place for us to actually have a chance to have a voice. Perhaps some of our listeners do not know what is the final goal, in a way, of the Democratic Odyssey, of this series of itinerant assemblies that we've been doing. And one of those goals is to institutionalize a European People's Assembly. What does it mean is that we want to have a place, an institution that actually is based on pure citizen participation, where you might receive a letter and actually be invited to either go to Brussels or perhaps to your own city and have a chance of expressing your voice in a collective way together with other citizens from across Europe. And we need that model to be permanent, a sense of accountability, not only towards our politicians, but also towards our very own capacity of be part of politics, of be part of democracy. So I guess my question to you is, how does participation makes us not lose hope?
One very important factor in a democratic society is the level of social capital that there is within. Like how much people are trusting each other in diversity, how much people are connected to one another, how much people act on local issues to help each other. Putnam wrote this book that was called Bullying Alone, if I'm not mistaken. That was he made a very interesting analysis in US. And he started to notice that one of the main points of US was that they had so many different associations. They had so many different small citizens parts that gathered together to do very specific things, and that helped them in the past to raise social capital, which helped them to build a democracy that was functioning. But during the past 50 years, we've seen a decrease in these organizations, and we've seen that all over the world. That's an issue that in Italy we call that corpi intermedi. There is what is within the citizens and the policymakers. So they don't do anymore this work of connecting the citizens with the policymakers, and the opposite way. The association civil society is an extremely important part of all this equation that we don't mention that enough. And that's why also I was very honored that you decided to involve me as a representative of civil society organization, because I'm not myself when I speak in these settings. I try to bring the voices and the opinions of the young people of the other parts of my organization. Something also that I want to mention is that these moments can really help to build social capital. They have outputs that are maybe the ideas, the recommendations, the policies that are created within that space. But if at the same time there are outcomes that are happening, you learning something as a person, you're connecting with somebody else. And by that connection, that small spark, maybe you gain a little bit of hope. I definitely do. And that's what I would like society to be moved forward. And also something that I wanted to mention, that we speak about institutionalization, but it does not need to become something that is bureaucratic. Especially when we speak about European Union, there are a lot of good things that are happening, but there is so much bureaucracy, there is so much stiffness that we really need to avoid if we want to have a permanent democratic assembly that works.
Yeah, certainly when we talk about going beyond the nation state, it's also because we genuinely are talking about unity further than what we believe it's established through language, through culture, through all these sometimes ways of seeing life and understanding one another with particular society limitations. And that is hope. That truly is hope. As we've heard, the story of assemblies is also the story of democracy, equality, culture, and going beyond the nation state. They remind us that democracy is not just about structures, but about imagination. Matteo, I would be talking with you for hours, but we do need to finish this podcast. So let me ask you one last question. Quite broad, I would say. So feel free to, have free will in answering this. And the question is, what's Europe's future?
Europe, European Union as a concept, at least in its modern contemporary intention, was born in a very, very dark period that was during Second World War. One of the founding figures of this is Altiero Spinelli. He was a political protester, and was arrested by the fascists and sent to this tiny island near Rome that's called Ventotene. There, together with a lot of other political prisoners, they started to interact with each other. They started to think about what is the future of Europe. And they envisioned something that would bring peace to a continent that was completely falling apart in that time. We speak about 1941, 1943. I think that in many respects, Europe is born as a concept of hope. how we move forward in this terrible moment in time, how we can bring peace. And federalism, that is the ideology that was born out of that, it's exactly this. I'm very afraid we need reforms that could bring European Union closer to the citizens. As an institution, we're missing a connection, we're missing democracy within the European Union. I believe that we need, as citizens, as people living in the continent, asking way more about our policymakers, because this is not enough. Europe as a concept, as a possibility, but not the actualization of that concept of hope that you were mentioning before. And I think that if we as a society collectively manage to rise to the occasion, it can start a ripple effect, a spillover effect, or in all other regional parts. And we can actually, see a society that will be hopeful. But right now, I'm skeptical. But we need occasions like this. We need people to be closer with themselves. We need people to be much more vocal, and we need to fight for what we care about.
Thank you so much, Matteo. I would add 2 more things. For me, Europe's future has to be participatory, and especially it has to be communitarian. It's been a real pleasure to record this podcast. I hope you all, dear listeners, have enjoyed it as much as we did having this conversation. And see you for the next round. Remember to not lose
As
hope.
we've heard today, democracy, equality and culture beyond the nation state aren't just a theme or motto of EA. They are ongoing practices, constantly reimagined through collaboration, creativity and connections. And to our listeners, we hope this conversation has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to think about what it means to participate in shaping European future. Not as something distant, but as something we co-create every day. If you'd like to learn more about European alternatives, our project and our upcoming events and activities, please visit our website euroalter.com and follow us on social media and on this podcast. I'm Marta Cillero Manzano. This has been the European Alternative Podcast. Thank you for listening and see you in the next one.